the war that defined a nation. The American Civil War, fought from 1861 to 1865, remains the bloodiest conflict in the nation's history. More than 600,000 soldiers lost their lives, and countless civilians suffered as the United States was torn apart. At its heart, the war was about slavery, but it was also about culture, economics, politics, and identity. For decades, historians and ordinary Americans alike have asked the same question. Could the Civil War have been avoided? Was there a peaceful path forward? Or was this devastating clash of brother against brother inevitable? In this video, we'll dive deep into the roots of the conflict. We'll explore slavery and the economy, sectional rivalries, political failures, and cultural divides. And we'll argue that by the mid-19th century, the differences between North and South had become so vast and the compromises so fragile that the Civil War was all but unavoidable. Section 1. America's Original Sin. Slavery at the core. The origins of the Civil War lie in slavery, the institution that had existed in America since its colonial beginnings. By the time of the nation's founding, slavery was deeply entrenched in the South's plantation economy, while the North was moving toward free labor. The Founding Fathers wrote lofty words about liberty and equality, yet allowed slavery to persist. The Constitution itself was full of compromises. The infamous 3/5 Clause, the Fugitive Slave Law, and protections for the international slave trade until 1808. These decisions kicked the can down the road, but they planted seeds of conflict. Slavery wasn't just an economic system, it was a way of life. For Southern elites, their wealth, power, and identity depended on enslaved labor. For Northern reformers and abolitionists, slavery was a moral abomination that contradicted the principles of the Republic. This contradiction was irreconcilable. America had been born with a fatal wound, and as the nation grew, the wound deepened. Section 2. The Economic Divide. Industrial North versus Agrarian South. By the 19th century, the economies of the North and South had diverged sharply. The North was industrializing, building factories, railroads, and cities. Immigrants fueled its labor force, and free market capitalism flourished. The South, however, remained overwhelmingly rural and dependent on cotton, King cotton, grown by enslaved people. In fact, Southern cotton fed Northern textile mills and fueled global trade. But this dependence made the South defensive and resistant to change. Tariffs became a flashpoint. Northerners often supported tariffs to protect industry, while Southerners opposed them, seeing them as unfair taxes that benefited the North at the expense of Southern planters. This wasn't just an economic disagreement. It was a clash of two incompatible systems, one based on free labor and innovation, the other on slavery and tradition. Section 3. Westward Expansion, a powder keg. As the United States expanded westward, the question of whether new states would allow slavery became a constant source of tension. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 tried to maintain balance, admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state. But every new territory threatened to upset this fragile equilibrium. The Mexican-American War of the 1840s added vast new lands, reigniting the debate. Would slavery spread west or be contained? The Compromise of 1850, including the harsh Fugitive Slave Act, attempted another bandage solution. But with each compromise, tempers flared. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 was the breaking point. It allowed settlers to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, leading to Bleeding Kansas, a mini-civil war fought with guns and blood in the plains. Westward expansion, instead of uniting the nation, magnified its divisions. Section 4. The Rise of Abolitionism and the Southern Response. By the mid-1800s, the abolitionist movement in the North was gaining strength. Writers like Harriet Beecher Stowe, whose novel Uncle Tom's Cabin exposed the brutality of slavery, stirred public outrage. Activists like Frederick Douglass, a formerly enslaved man, gave powerful speeches calling for emancipation. The South, however, doubled down. Instead of admitting slavery's moral contradictions, Southern leaders defended it as a positive good. They claimed it was sanctioned by the Bible, essential to the economy, and even a benevolent system compared to Northern wage labor. This hardening of positions meant that dialogue was increasingly impossible. For every abolitionist demand, there was a Southern counterclaim. The two sides weren't just disagreeing, they were living in entirely different moral universes. Section 5. Political breakdown and the failure of compromise. For decades, American politics revolved around compromise. Leaders like Henry Clay, the great compromiser, managed to hold the Union together with deals like the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850. But by the 1850s, the political system itself began to fracture. The Whig Party collapsed, the Democratic Party split along sectional lines, and the Republican Party emerged in the North, dedicated to stopping the spread of slavery. The Dred Scott decision in 1857 further inflamed tensions. The Supreme Court ruled that African Americans could never be citizens and that Congress had no power to ban slavery in the territories. This wasn't just a legal ruling, it was a death blow to the hope of compromise. By the time Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860, the South felt cornered. Lincoln promised not to abolish slavery outright, but he opposed its expansion. For Southern leaders, that was enough. They believed their way of life was under mortal threat. Section 6. Secession. The breaking point. The election of Lincoln was the final straw. Before he even took office, 7 Southern states seceded from the Union, declaring themselves the Confederate States of America. They didn't secede over tariffs. They didn't secede over abstract political theories. Their declarations made it clear. They seceded to protect slavery. The Union could not accept secession, because if states could simply leave whenever they disagreed, the United States would cease to exist as a nation. The conflict was unavoidable. When Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in April 1861, the war officially began. Section 7. Why the war was unavoidable. So why was the Civil War unavoidable? Because at its heart, it was about 2 fundamentally incompatible visions of America. One vision was of a free labor democracy, where all men, at least in theory, could rise by their own effort. The other was of a slave-holding aristocracy, where human beings were property and inequality was built into the system. No compromise could reconcile these visions. Every attempt at balance was temporary. Every deal just postponed the inevitable. As long as slavery existed, the Union was unstable. The war was the violent resolution of a contradiction present since America's founding. Section 8. Could it have been prevented? Some argue that stronger leadership, better compromises, or gradual emancipation might have prevented the war. But history suggests otherwise. The South's defense of slavery only grew more extreme over time. Northern abolitionists became more determined. The expansion of the nation made every new state a battleground. By the 1850s, the nation was already at war in spirit, if not yet on the battlefield. Bleeding Kansas was proof that the conflict was already underway. The Civil War may not have been inevitable in 1776, or even in 1820, but by 1860, the two sides were on a collision course. Section 9. The human cost and legacy. The war that followed was catastrophic. Brothers fought brothers. Families were divided. Entire cities were burned. But from that destruction came the end of slavery and the redefinition of America. The Union was preserved. The Constitution was amended. The promise of liberty was extended, at least in principle, to formerly enslaved people. Yet even today, the scars remain. The Civil War may have ended in 1865, but the debates over race, equality, and the meaning of freedom continue to shape American life. Conclusion: the price of a house divided. Abraham Lincoln famously said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." The United States, from its founding, was divided against itself on the issue of slavery. For decades, Americans tried to patch over the contradiction with compromises. But in the end, those patches could not hold. The Civil War was not just a political or military conflict. It was the inevitable clash between two visions of humanity. One based on freedom, the other on bondage. That is why the Civil War was unavoidable. And while the war settled the question of slavery, it left behind a legacy of division that continues to challenge the United States to this very day. If you found this exploration insightful, give this video a like, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Timeless Questions channel for more deep dives into philosophy, history, and human nature.